Hey, it's Dave here. In this video, I'm going to walk you through setting up ESPresence Companion step by step. We'll start by installing the ESPresence Companion add-on, then go through config.yaml, create a floor plan, and add ESP32 nodes followed by devices so everything makes sense visually. I'll also cover calibration and optimization towards the end, following the official documentation and best practices. By the end, you'll have a working ESPresence Companion setup that you can build on and refine over time. This video is a follow-up to my earlier ESPresence video, so I'm going to assume you already have a few prerequisites in place. Home Assistant installed, the Mosquitto Broker add-on set up with MQTT integrated, your ESP32 boards already flashed as ESPresence nodes, and the devices you want to track configured to broadcast as Bluetooth beacons. If you haven't done any of that yet, don't worry, I'll link those earlier videos in the description so you can come back to this one afterwards. Most of what I'll be showing comes directly from the official ESPresence documentation, which we'll follow as we go. One quick thing to mention before we get started: I had a comment from my last video from Rob, who reported ESPresence being prone to devices bouncing between nodes when used in a multi-floor setup. I live in a single floor flat, so I can't personally test or validate that scenario here, but everything I'm showing in this video gives you the correct foundation for building and tuning your setup. So with that out of the way, let's get started. From the official ESPresence documentation, under Companion and Installation, you're going to need to add the repository to your Home Assistant environment and then install the ESPresence Companion add-on. You can do this by clicking on this button here. Now, because I've got two Home Assistant environments, I would need to change this to reflect the relevant IP address. I'm just going to click back, and then once you've done that, you then click on this section to install the add-on. There is a slightly more manual method where you can copy the repository URL here and then navigate to Settings Add-ons to add that URL. And then once you've done it from the add-on store, you should see ESPresence Companion as an add-on to add. So I'm going to do the manual way. Heading over to Home Assistant, if you go to Settings, then select Add-ons and click on Add-on Store. And if you go to these three dots here and select Repositories, we're now going to paste in that URL I copied earlier. Then click Add, and then close that window. Now when I do a search for ESPresence, you should see ESPresence Companion as one of the options. So we're going to click on that. Then we're going to select Install. Once that's installed, if you check Watchdog, which means it will restart if it crashes, I'm also going to check Add to Sidebar, and you should now see you've got ESPresence as an option here on your sidebar. And then just click Start. Now that we've started ESPresence Companion, I'm going to open the UI, which you can either do from Open Web UI here, or from the sidebar, you've got ESPresence, which I'm going to click on now. All of these settings come from the ESPresence config.yaml file, and not to be confused with the Home Assistant configuration.yaml file. And any changes you make apply in real time as soon as you save the file, so there's no need to reload or restart Home Assistant. The 3D view is pretty much what you would expect. It's the same floor plan, but in 3D, and you can rotate the view with your mouse and zoom in and zoom out with the scroll wheel. Just like the 2D map, it shows both the nodes and devices, but remember, on a fresh install, these are just example values until you configure your own. Devices are defined in the ESPresence config.yaml file, and wildcards can be used to automatically discover things like iBeacons, which is why you'll often see multiple devices listed on a fresh install. From the UI, if I click on Edit, you can give the device a friendly name and adjust the RSSI at 1 meter. And if I just cancel that window, you'll also see here there's a Show All button. When I check that, it will view every discovered devices and not just the ones specified from the YAML file. Nodes are defined in the ESPresense config file as well. They may appear automatically in the UI when they come online, and from this edit button here, you can change things like the name and calibration settings, but you can't set their location in the UI. Node locations must be defined using the point values in the config file. Without those point values, ESPresense Companion can't show visual positions like devices because it relies on node locations for triangulations. You'll also see a delete button here on some nodes. Deleting that node only removes it somewhat temporarily because if it's defined in the YAML, it will reappear until you remove it from the config file as well. And at this point, the node calibration page will be empty until you've added your nodes to the config file and set their point values. Think of this page as like a live diagnostics and tuning overview and not a configuration editor. You don't really change anything here. The only control you do have is there's a reset calibration button just here. And for geolocation, it falls back to a default GPS location set from the config file. I could have sworn I've seen this building before on TV, but I can't seem to remember where. Now that you've seen the UI, let's go back to the official documentation and follow these steps. I'll be bouncing between this page, the config file, and the UI, but I'll keep everything in the same order as the docs, so it's easy to follow. From Companion and Installation, if you scroll down, we're going to start off with MQTT Setup. Now I'm going to assume you already have the Mosquitto Broker add-on installed and MQTT integrated. If you haven't, I've already made a video earlier which I will link in the description. You will also need to have MQTT Discovery enabled, but since that only takes a few seconds, I'm just going to quickly show you how to do that. Good chance it's already enabled. Back into Home Assistant, if you go to Settings, and then select Devices and Services, and just do a search for MQTT. And if you click on this Configure button, then select Configure Options, and you should see here Enable Discovery is turned on, and Discovery prefix should almost certainly be Home Assistant. While we're here, we're also going to need to apply this node configuration using this MQTT topic and payload, which is this particular part here. Now, just before we do that, I'm going to open up another tab. And if I go into Settings, back to Devices and Services, MQTT, and I'm just going to find one of my ESP32 nodes. Doesn't matter which one, as long as it's online. Now what you'll see here is it's got maximum distance set to 16, and this payload that we're going to send will change that value to 0 on all of the ones which are online. So if I go back to the documentation, and I'm just going to copy that key, paste that into the topic, then I'm going to copy the value, which is 0. And what's going to happen is just before I press publish, this value from 16 will go to 0. So if I just press that now, and then go to the other tab, and you can see that's worked. You don't have to navigate to here when doing it, but it just gives you that sanity check that when you publish that topic and specified that payload, that we know it definitely did work. I can now close that tab down. Back onto the documentation, if we just scroll down a little bit further, you can now see the next steps is moving on to the configuration to set up your floor plan, placing your nodes accordingly to the node placement guide, and start tracking your devices. So if we select configuration, and for those of you who weren't starting from a fresh install, this example file here, which I'm just going to open up in a new tab, is exactly what my setting is currently looking as. So you could always copy that in case you lose it. We're now going to navigate to that YAML file. So if you go to Home Assistant and select File Editor, and you should have a folder called ESPresence and config.yaml. Just to make you aware, under the MQTT section, if you are using the Mosquitto Broker add-on within your Home Assistant instance, you don't actually need to fill out these details. So you can leave the host, username and password blank. It's only if you've got an external MQTT broker, then you would need to enter the credentials. Now at the moment, it's got those example floor plans, example devices and example nodes. We're going to remove all of that before we proceed any further. So if you scroll down, and from this section here where it's got floors, we're going to delete all of that. We're also going to delete all of those nodes. And for devices, it's just that one manual device is showing. The rest are essentially wildcards where it automatically looks for stuff with those prefixes. So it should now look something like this. Now, for those of you who are following along, what I'll do is I'll save a copy of that file exactly as it is at the moment, and I'll put it onto GitHub and put a link in the description so you can start exactly from the same part I'm starting at. Now we're going to save those changes. And if we go back into ESPresence, it should look different. You'll notice you can see the map is now going to show empty. In fact, it's actually not loading. And when I click on 3D view, it's also going to show empty. It does still seem to have some stale records of the nodes, but that's fine. When I go to devices, I can see some of those old iBeacons. I can just clear that up from MQTT. And if I go to nodes, now I can get rid of these ones. I can start deleting them because these were specified in the YAML. So if I deleted it earlier, they would eventually just come back again. So I'm just going to delete these to free them up. These 3 devices are real devices, which is also why they're green and they've got the IP addresses. So I'm just going to delete these nodes. Actually, if I just open up another tab and I'm going to go into settings, go to add-ons, and I'm just going to find the ESPresence add-ons and just give it a restart. Let's see what that does. If I go back to nodes, yep, that seems to have got rid of those stale records. That's looking useful. Before we start building the floor plan, it's worth quickly going over the different ways you can create one in ESPresence. This really comes down to personal preference. There isn't a single right way, but some options are more practical than others, depending on your setup. The first option is Magic Plan. It works, but it's a mobile app only, and personally, I prefer designing a floor plan on a desktop using a keyboard and mouse, especially when working with precise measurements. So for me, that rules it out pretty quickly. The second option is ESPresence Floor Plan Creator. It's very easy and intuitive to use, but it only supports simple square rooms. That doesn't work for my flat because I've got angled walls. On top of that, at the time of recording, the tool is currently offline. The link just redirects back to the ESPresence homepage, so I can't demo it anyway. That said, if you've got a simple layout with square rooms and you want something quick with no fuss, it can still be a good option. Another option is defining your floor plan manually in YAML. You measure your rooms and then define corner points in either a clockwise or counterclockwise order. You can absolutely create angled rooms this way, but I found it quite tedious and not very intuitive, especially when dealing with more complex layouts. One advantage of doing it this way is accuracy. Because you're typing the measurements directly, you avoid any scaling or snapping issues you can sometimes get when drawing rooms in software. That said, it's mainly useful for understanding how the coordinate system works. You start by defining the floor and its bounds, which describes the area and height of that floor, and then the rooms sit underneath that. To help visualize how the YAML translates into an actual layout, I've put together a quick PowerPoint slide, and then we'll look at how it appears in the ESPresence Web UI. So I've currently got the ESPresence Web UI open, and I'm currently at the Maps section. And if you hover your mouse cursor over one of these areas, and in this example, point 1, you'll notice on the bottom right you can see X is 12 and Y is 2. So what I've done is I've referenced points and I've put 12, 2, and this is essentially the start point. Then when I go to the next section, at point 2, it's now saying X is 16 and Y is 2, so I'm putting 16, 2, and it's essentially moving 4 meters to the right. Then when I go to the next part, I'm now going to click on where section 3 is, which X is 16, Y is 6, so I put 16, 6, which is essentially moving 4 meters up. And then I'm finally going to move to the left, which is where position 4 is, and you can see X is 12 and Y is 16, so it will say 12 and 6 here. And once you've got those 4 points, it will automatically close the room. However, just to be clear, you can add more than 4 points, and it's just whatever the last point is will automatically close to the original one. So it will end up looking something like this, and it's just got the name test room. So that's an example of the YAML on the left, and then you can see how it would look when you're in ESPresence map section. Hopefully that made sense to you, because when I was reading the documentation, it wasn't immediately clear as to how the formatting of the YAML works and what numbers you should be typing. There's one more option I want to show you, and this is the one I personally use for creating floor plans, is Sweet Home 3D. Mainly because it's free, works well on a desktop, and is a free online converter that turns the project into YAML, which you can import straight into your ESPresence config file. One important thing to be aware of though, Sweet Home 3D has a few different versions which can be a bit misleading. There's a paid mobile app, and there's also a paid version in the Microsoft Store. You can ignore both of those. The free desktop version you want is hosted on SourceForge. That's the one I'm using, and I'll put a direct link to it in the video description. With that out of the way, let's open Sweet Home 3D and get started. Now in this example, I'm going to import a background image of my floor layout, something I'm lucky enough to still have from when I moved in, and I'll use it purely as a guide while I trace the walls and rooms. I appreciate most people watching this won't have an image like this, but that's absolutely fine. You'll still see exactly how to draw the walls and rooms. And for those people who do have a layout image, this section might come in handy. I'm keeping this super minimal, just walls and rooms, because that's all ESPresence Companion actually cares about. If enough people ask for it, I might do a full Sweet Home 3D walkthrough at some point, but for now, this is just about getting it working. Now, just before I import the background image, you might want to go to File and Preferences, and under Unit, you can choose whether you want to be working with imperial or metric. I'm going to leave it as centimeter and the rest as default settings, and just close that window. To import a background image, if you just right click in the design area and select Import Background Image, and then select Choose Image, and then I'm just going to browse to a location where I've got this image saved and select Open. Now it might give you a warning if the image is of a large size, and I'm just going to select Reduce Size so it doesn't affect the performance. I'm just going to full screen this window. So if you click Continue, now in this part you're going to define the scale of the image, and I happen to know that from this point here to here is about 7.5 meters. So I'm just going to set that to 750 centimeters, and make sure you get this right because I recorded this earlier and I accidentally added an extra 0. Then click continue, and now you're going to define a point of origin. I'm just going to select the bottom left, which should be about here, and then click finish. And if I zoom out, you can now see I've got that floor plan. And I'm just going to drag these slider bars to make it a little bit more viewable. Now I'm going to start drawing the walls around this section, which is my flat. The rest of the image you can see is the neighbouring flat opposite and the main entrance. To start creating the walls, if you right click and select Create Walls or Ctrl Shift and W, and the first time you do this, it should give you some sort of an instructional prompt just saying you that each time you left click, it's going to join the wall together, and then to finish, you would just double click and it looks something like that. Now another thing you'll notice is my flat is angled, and when I try to create the walls, I can't quite seem to snap them in place because the angles are incremented in 15 degrees. If you hold down the Alt key, it allows you to precisely align them up. And if that doesn't work for you, some forums suggest on older versions it's actually the Control key. So try holding either the Alt key or the Control key in order to line up your walls to the precise angle. So I'm just going to quickly create all of the walls. Now you might want to let go of the Control or the Alt key when you're doing a completely perfectly horizontal or vertical line. And now I'm just going to finish by double clicking, and I'm just going to do the remaining inside walls as well. And that's looking good. I'm just going to right click and hide the background image just to make sure that I have created all walls, and I can see I have successfully done that. And now I'm going to show the background again. Now the steps to create the rooms are more or less identical. If you just right click and select Create Rooms. If it's the first time you've run this application or you haven't checked Do Not Display this tip again, you'll get some instructional prompt where you just keep on left clicking, where you double click to finish or just press the Escape key. I'm just going to click OK to that message and start building up a wall. And just a reminder, if you are working with angles, you may need to hold down the Alt key or the Control key if it's an older version. So let's just make the bathroom first. Now I've actually got two cupboards over here and here, so what I'm going to do is create those additionally as a room. Now for this last section, technically this is actually just one room, but I want to somewhat section it so that you've got the lounge, kitchen and the dining room. So I'm going to create this as 3 separate rooms. Now that I've finished drawing the rooms, I'm just going to right click and hide the background image just to make sure I've covered all the areas, and that's looking good. And I'm just going to show it again. Now the last section is you're going to want to give those rooms a name. So I'm just going to click on each ones, including the cupboard, and just name them all. So if I right click, select, and then select those rooms. And the last part is just to save that floor plan. So if I go to File, Save As, and I'll just call it ground floor. Now once you've saved your floor plan using Sweet Home 3D, you're going to want to head over to the following GitHub page, where there's a really helpful online tool which will convert that file into a YAML, which you can then import into your ESPresense YAML file to create your rooms. If you click on this link, it's going to open up this page. Now something to watch out for, if you are doing this from a laptop instead of a desktop, you might find you can't see that Create YAML icon or button. and it's just because your screen size is a little bit too small. So what you might need to do, depending on your web browser, is just click on these three dots and just zoom out a few notches. Because when I was doing this from my laptop screen, I couldn't see the Create YAML button, and it was just because the resolution I think was too low, so I had to zoom out to get it to work. Good chance you're going to run into that same problem and not know what's going on. So from here, we're just going to click on this button and then navigate to the floor plan file you saved earlier and select Open. Now it's optional if you want to change your floor ID to reflect the floor. Because my flat is at street level, I'm renaming this to ground floor. And yes, I know Americans will call this first floor. Then you select Generate YAML. And you can see here, it's got the YAML file, which you can then copy and paste. So I'm just going to select all of that and copy that file. Now that we've copied that YAML, we're going to go back into Home Assistant and paste it into the ESPresence config file. So from Home Assistant, if you go into File Editor, and if you browse to a folder called ESPresence, which is this one here, and then if you open the config YAML file. Now we're going to scroll down and there should be a key called Floors, which is this section here. We're just going to delete that because the code we're going to paste already has the floors key. And it should look something like this. So you can now see it's already specified floors. It's set it as the ground. The bounds is essentially the width, height and depth of that floor. More information is available from the official ESPresence documentations page here, where you can see here it's giving some examples of setting the bounds properties. And you've got the rooms you can see here, you've got the bathroom along with the points and so on for each other room. Now we're going to save changes. And just a reminder, unlike the Home Assistant configuration.yaml, this is all saved in real time. So now when I go into ESPresence from here, I should now see, which I can, the floor plan I've created. And if I just go into the 3D view section, which is here, you can see I've got that nice 3D view of my flat. Now that we've created that floor plan, we're going to need to get the points for each of the ESP32 nodes so we can reference the location of where they're placed within the rooms. If you go to Nodes, from here you should be able to see all of your ESP32 nodes that are online. And for example, this one where it says dining room, if I click edit, you're going to want to copy the ID for these as we're going to be entering it in the YAML along with setting the points. Another thing you might have noticed is these last two ones are showing a slightly older version, so you might want to click update. I'll do that later on though. Along with also knowing the IDs, if you go to the Maps tab, and I'm just going to drag this across, if you hover the mouse cursor over the locations, and in the bottom right you should see X is 10.7 and Y is 20.2. I would get yourself a scrap piece of paper so you can write down those values as you get those points. I've also got one in the kitchen, which is roughly around here, so that would be 11.3 and 16.7. However, another thing you'll notice is there is a little bit of an offset. When you enter these values in the YAML, you might find it appears slightly to the right or slightly to the left or up or down, so you may have to refine it after you've entered those values. I've got one in the dining room about here, one in the lounge, one's in the cupboard, but I'm just going to call it hall, and I've got one in the bathroom around this sort of location. Once you've got those node IDs and the points, if you go into File Editor, and we're going to browse to the ESPresence folder, and then open this config.yaml file. And now if you scroll down and look for nodes, and I'm just going to paste in the YAML here. So for one of these nodes, I've got ID equals POE underscore kitchen, and then I've given it a friendly name of POE space kitchen. I've set stationary to true so that ESPresence knows it's not a moving device. And then those are the points that I got earlier, and I've set the floor to ground. Now, just to make you aware, nodes can actually have more than one floor set. If I just quickly paste in this example, if you've got some stairs, you could set the floors as first and second or ground and first. But in my case, I've just got the one floor, so I don't need to do that. Now, while I've got this config file open, there's also an optimization setting known as locators. If you currently had the default setting, it's probably saying first and second floor. So just make sure you change those floors to reflect the nodes that you're working with. And in my case, they're set as ground floor. I'm now going to save those changes. And if I go back into ESPresence, what I should now see is those nodes showing in the floor plan. And you can also see I've got some devices showing as well. But those devices have somewhat got random names like tile and then a load of random letters and numbers, or iBeacon. If you go to the Devices tab, this is a list of devices it's currently found. Now, these iBeacon devices are my mobile phone and my watch, and the tiles are my tile keyring and my tile wallet. I already know exactly which one's which because I've got it in a list. But what you'll want to do is click on Edit and copy that exact key, and you're going to need to paste it into the YAML and give it a friendly name. You could just put the name in here and that will also work, but I just want to do it in the YAML, so I'm going to click Cancel. This will make a bit more sense in a second why I'm doing this. So now we're going to go back into File Editor. And from that config file again, this time I'm going to look for devices. And what you'll notice is I've got these wildcard entries to automatically discover and add those devices. So you've got tile, watch, iBeacon, some of the common items. However, they're going to have a somewhat random name. So I'm going to paste in this code of my 4 devices. And you can see this is my S23 mobile. This will show as Dave's watch. This is my tile keyring and this is my tile wallet. Now, this next bit is optional, but since this part here is a series of wildcards and somewhat auto-discovery, I don't want to see any more devices because I'm only interested in those 4 devices. So I'm going to comment these out. Now I'm going to save changes. And although earlier I did say that any changes is applied in real time, if you find that you've added these devices into the YAML and they don't appear to be showing, you might want to give the ESPresence Companion app a restart. I'm just going to see what happens first if it works, but earlier it wasn't behaving. So if I go into ESPresence, and what I should see now, and in this example it's actually working, I can see S23 mobile, tile keyring, and tile wallet. If this isn't the case for yourself, I'm just going to show you how to give that a restart. So I'll just quickly open up another tab, and if you go into Settings, then go to Add-ons, and then ESPresence Companion, and just select Restart. In my case, it seems to be working, but I did find earlier it was giving me some headaches. Now that we've added our floor plan, nodes, and devices into the config.yaml, the next step is optimization and calibration. I want to split these into 2 parts because they often get mixed up. First is optimization. This applies to your ESP32 nodes, and in most cases, the default configuration from the documentation is already present and enabled. If it's not, you can paste it into your config.yaml. Just make sure you don't already have an optimization block defined and then save that file. These settings allows ESPresence Companion to automatically tune how the nodes intercept signal strength over time. Calibration is where things can look a bit daunting because there are 2 main documentation pages that talk about it. One is the optimization page we're already on, which includes default values and optional device calibration. The other is the calibration guide, which goes into more details about the theory behind it. At a glance, this can look quite complex, but the most important thing to understand is that for most setups, you can leave the majority of these values alone. ESPresence Companion already handles most of the heavy lifting automatically. Manual calibration like adjusting RSSI at 1 meter for devices is optional and only really worth doing if distances are clearly off. I'll link both of these pages in the description if you want to read through them, but for now, let me show you how this looks inside ESPresence Companion. From ESPresence Companion, if you go to Nodes, and from one of these nodes, if I go to Edit, you'll see it gives you these various values. You've got absorption. It controls how quickly ESPresence assumes Bluetooth signals weaken as they pass through walls, furniture, and distance. Higher values assume denser environments, lower values assume more open space. Then you've got the RX adjustment receiver signal strength indicator. This compensates for ESP32 boards or antennas that hear Bluetooth signals stronger or weaker than others. Only changes if you know the node has a weaker or stronger antenna than the rest. Then a TX reference received signal strength indicator is the expected signal strength at 1 meter. It's only used for node-to-node iBeacon measurements during optimization and for fallback for devices that don't advertise RSSI at 1 meter. It doesn't change the transmit power, and most users don't need to touch it. Maximum distance should be set to 0. This removes the limit, allowing ESPresence Companion to see all devices and use multiple nodes for triangulation, rather than ignoring distance readings. Now, because I've got optimization set to true, so if I just quickly go to another tab where I've already got the config file open, you'll see here optimization is set to true, and then the three values it's applying to is the absorption, min and max, RX adjustment, min and max, and a TX reference, min and max. So that would be these following values here it applies to. The maximum distance was actually set either directly from here or by running an MQTT command so that all nodes are set to maximum distance of 0. Now, to calibrate your devices, if you go to Devices, and you'll need to do this for each one that's slightly off. So I'm going to start with my mobile and click Calibrate. And you'll need to position your mobile exactly 1 meter away from one of the nodes. In this example, I'm using PoE bedroom node. And from this section here where you can see the map, if you just hold down the left mouse button to move it around, and then if you double left click, it will zoom in. And if you hold down shift and double left click, it will zoom out. Or you can hold down the shift key and just use the mouse wheel to zoom out and back in. You can do this from your mobile phone using the pinch gesture, but this page is really difficult to navigate through on a mobile or tablet, and you're better off doing it from a PC. So I'm just going to zoom in. This part of the interface can look very messy because there's a lot of live node and signal data being shown at the same time. So to make it clearer, I'm going to refer back to the floor plan instead. Let's say my S23 mobile is physically in a different part of the bedroom where it's currently shown. What I'll do is drag the device to the actual real-world position on the map. So back to the other screen again, you'll see there's this circle which I can click on, where I can actually drag it to the location where the device is actually placed. Then I just scroll down and you'll see that option, Accept New Calibration, and it's going to set the RSSI value to -60. If I just go to another tab where I'm still on the device's page, and then I go to Edit, this is the part where it's going to change that value. So when I apply it, it's going to make it -61. Now, if I just go back, while that user interface method does work, it's a little bit inaccurate. And what I prefer to do instead is on this table here, you've got PoE bedroom, which is the node my mobile phone is 1 meter away. And you want to keep your eye out on this particular section where it's got estimated RSSI at 1 meter. So at the moment it's saying -59, and give it a few minutes so it can give you some different readings. And I'd write down all those readings and then build up an average. In this example, I'm not going to wait, so I'm going to set that to -59. I mean, that is actually pretty close already where it says -60. Okay, now it seems to have changed to -58. So let's set it to -58. So I'll copy that value, and then you'll want to go to Devices section here. And then from the mobile, I'll click on Edit. And then where it's got RSSI at 1 meter, I'm now going to set that to -58, and then I would click Save. And you'd essentially want to repeat that for all of your devices to just give it a slightly more accurate reading as you're tweaking those settings. Hopefully that made sense, and you should understand how to tweak the calibration of your devices. The whole purpose of device calibration is when you go to Map, and you can see here it's showing you the devices and giving you an indication of not only which room it's in, but whereabouts it is within the room. So after you've made that tweaks, it may make it a little bit more spot on. One thing to keep in mind is that this floor plan was traced from a printed layout I was given when I moved in, which isn't perfectly to scale. Because of that, the exact device positions you see here will never be 100% accurate, even with optimization settings tweaked. Now, a part I forgot to mention earlier is about setting the GPS coordinates for ESPresense Companion. You can either do this using Google Maps or Google Earth. I'm going to show you how to do this in Google Maps just because the coordinates are easier to copy. So from Google Maps, I'm just going to paste in my home address. And if I just zoom in with the mouse wheel and I'm going to select a particular area. Now, if I right click, you'll see you've got the coordinates in the numeric value I need for Home Assistant. Click on that and it will automatically copy them for you. And on the bottom right, you should see where it's got 20 meters, which is the elevation level from sea. Those two values you're going to need. Now I'm going to go back into the ESPresense config file and I'm going to change the latitude and longitude here. Now the rotation value is applying to your floor plan rotation and not so much the GPS coordinates rotation. I'm going to leave it at 10 for now, and I'm going to save those changes. Now I'm going to go back into ESPresense, and as I zoom out, you can see it's got that location showing. If I just quickly zoom back in, if you just make a mental note of the rotation of the rooms, so we can see kitchen there is on the bottom right, and we've got dining room at the bottom. If I just go back into the YAML, and I'm just going to set that rotation to 100, and then click Save. Now when I go back into it again, you'll see the rotation of those rooms has changed. So that's something you'll need to play with to get that sweet spot so that they're aligned in the correct direction. So that's ESPresense Companion set up end to end, from getting it installed, building a floor plan, adding nodes and devices, and covering optimization and calibration without overly complicating things. If you've made it to the end, you should now have a working setup and much clearer idea of how ESPresense actually works. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to receive more smart home automation tutorials. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.